There are people who did everything right. They built a stable life, fulfilled their responsibilities, and achieved what was expected of them. And yet, in moments of silence, they feel that something is missing inside, even if they cannot explain what it is. Billy Graham observed with care this quiet emptiness that does not come from external lack, but from an inner absence that is difficult to name. This is a reflection on that restless feeling of having everything, and still sensing that something essential is not complete. This feeling of inner lack is often confusing precisely because it has no obvious cause. On the outside, life appears complete. There is work, routine, relationships, achievements. Nothing is clearly missing. And still, a persistent sense of emptiness emerges, as if something essential were not being reached. Many people feel this without realizing when it began. There is no specific moment of rupture. Life simply moves forward, goals are met, stages are completed, and little by little the person begins to notice that achievements no longer fill them as they once did, not because they lost their value, but because they do not reach this deeper inner space. This conflict is silent because it does not fit into any common narrative of suffering. There is no clear loss. There is no visible crisis. On the contrary, there is a life that functions. And that is precisely what makes the feeling difficult to recognize and even harder to express. Many people feel confused when they experience this emptiness. They think they should not feel this way. After all, everything is in place. This contradiction generates guilt, as if acknowledging this lack were a sign of ingratitude or weakness, so the feeling is pushed inward and kept silent. This inner emptiness does not arise from a lack of things, but from a disconnection from one's own experience. The person lives, accomplishes, achieves, but feels as if they are always slightly distant from themselves. The days pass, commitments accumulate, and the sensation is of filling life on the outside while something remains absent on the inside. There is also a quiet expectation that the next achievement will resolve this, the next goal, the next step, the next recognition. But when it arrives, the emptiness remains, not with the same intensity, but with the same discrete presence. This conflict does not draw external attention because it does not interrupt life. On the contrary, it often coexists with success, stability, and recognition. People who have made it also feel this emptiness, and precisely because of that, they rarely speak about it. This feeling shows itself in small signs: a difficulty in experiencing lasting satisfaction, a fatigue that cannot be explained only by effort, a sense that life is correct but incomplete. Nothing seems wrong, yet something seems to be missing. Many people live with this for years without ever naming it. They simply feel that something is always slightly out of reach, and because there is no simple explanation, life goes on. The emptiness is pushed to the background while responsibilities continue to occupy the main space. This is the central conflict, having built a full life and still feeling an inner space that remains empty, a feeling that is not resolved by more achievements, but that also does not disappear on its own. It simply accompanies, silently, while everything seems to be in place. Billy Graham observed this inner emptiness with special care, precisely because it appeared more often in people who, in the eyes of everyone else, seemed to be doing well. For him, the feeling of lack was not necessarily a sign of failure, but an indication that inner life had been left in the background for too long. He noticed that many people build a solid, organized, and functional existence, but do so almost entirely oriented outward. Decisions are guided by expectations, goals, responsibilities, and external standards. Over time, a person learns to measure their own life by what they achieve, by what they deliver, by what they sustain. And in that process, something internal stops being heard. Billy Graham did not treat this emptiness as ingratitude or an inability to appreciate what one has. On the contrary, he saw this feeling as a quiet sign of disconnection. When life comes to be lived only as a sequence of tasks and goals, inner meaning tends to weaken, even if everything appears to be in order. In his view, the problem was not having possessions, achievements, or stability. The problem arose when these things became the sole reference for meaning. A person can have a life full of commitments and still feel that something essential is not being touched, not because something new is missing, but because something deep has been forgotten. Billy Graham observed that this emptiness is often mistaken for temporary discouragement or fatigue, but over time it proves to be more persistent. It does not disappear with rest, nor with new achievements. It remains as a hard-to-explain sense of incompleteness, appearing especially in moments of silence. He also noticed that many people avoid looking at this emptiness because it seems to threaten everything they have built. Admitting that something is missing inside can give the impression that the entire journey was in vain, and so the feeling is suppressed, rationalized, or ignored. For Billy Graham, this emptiness was not a problem to be solved quickly, but a call to inner awareness. Not in a heavy religious sense, but a human one. An invitation to recognize that life is not sustained only by what is done, achieved, or possessed, but also by what is lived internally. He saw that when this inner space is not acknowledged, a person tends to seek constant filling. More activities, more goals, more distractions, but none of them reach that specific place where the sense of lack settles, and this creates a quiet cycle of frustration. Billy Graham did not offer easy answers to this feeling. He simply pointed out that emptiness does not arise by chance. It appears when inner life is pushed into the background, when a person lives mainly to keep everything functioning, but rarely to listen to themselves. This perspective builds trust because it does not accuse, oversimplify, or promise quick solutions. It merely acknowledges that it is possible to have everything that was planned and still feel that something essential has not been reached. In modern life, this sense of inner lack finds even more room to become confused. The world offers countless forms of external filling, clear goals, defined paths, indicators of success, visible rewards. There is always something to achieve, something to improve, something to conquer. And this creates the impression that emptiness can be resolved with the next step. Routine becomes organized around results. The day is filled with tasks, commitments, demands, and expectations. The mind learns to operate at this constant pace, always looking toward what comes next. Little space remains to notice how all of this is being lived internally. Life moves forward, but inner experience becomes compressed between obligations. Billy Graham observed that in this context, many people begin to confuse meaning with performance. If they are producing, delivering, sustaining responsibilities, they believe they should feel complete. When that does not happen, confusion arises. Something feels wrong, but there is no clear reason. Inner emptiness intensifies precisely because there is no time to listen to it. Any discomfort is quickly smothered by more activity, more work, more commitments, more distractions. Modern life teaches people to move forward, not to pause and feel. Nights reveal this most clearly. When movement slows, when there are no more tasks to complete, the sense of lack appears, not as deep sadness, but as a quiet restlessness. The person is tired but not satisfied, rested yet not fulfilled. Billy Graham saw that this emptiness becomes more frequent in lives that function perfectly on the outside. The more organized and stable the routine, the harder it is to admit that something essential is not being reached. And so, the feeling is pushed inward, treated as a phase, as ingratitude, as something that will pass. Contemporary culture reinforces this silence. There is little talk about inner emptiness when everything seems to be going well. The dominant narrative is always one of achievement, progress, growth. Acknowledging an inner lack in this context feels out of place. And because of that, many suffer in silence. This emptiness also blends with emotional fatigue. The person feels as if they are always doing a lot, but feeling very little. Busy, yet disconnected. And the more they try to fill this space with external things, the more they realize that the feeling persists. Perhaps you recognize this in simple gestures, reaching a goal and feeling only a brief sense of relief, planning something new in the hope that it will bring enthusiasm, looking at your own life and knowing that everything is in place, and yet still feeling that something is not complete. This is the modern form of this conflict, an emptiness that does not arise from a lack of opportunities, but from an excess of outward orientation, a feeling that grows in full, organized and functional lives, but that find no space to listen to what is happening inside. It is in this scenario that reflection needs to slow down again. because there is a kind of emptiness that only becomes visible when movement stops, and it is there that it tends to reveal itself most honestly. There are moments when life finally slows down. Tasks are finished, demands ease. The environment becomes quiet. It is in this space where almost nothing happens that inner emptiness usually becomes more noticeable. During the day, it stays hidden among commitments, goals, and distractions. At night, when there is nothing left to accomplish, it draws closer, not as a clear thought, but as a feeling difficult to define, a quiet absence that resists easy words. Billy Graham observed that many people avoid this silence without realizing it. They fill every possible gap. They turn something on. They seek stimulation, anything that prevents this inner encounter. Not because the emptiness is dangerous, but because it brings questions that do not ask for immediate answers. In the early hours of the morning, this feeling grows stronger. The body asks for rest, but the mind remains awake. There is no intense agitation, only a persistent sense that something essential is not being touched. The person is tired, but not satisfied, safe, but not whole. This emptiness does not accuse. It does not say that something is wrong. It simply presents itself as a momentary lack of meaning, as if everything were functioning, but without reaching a deeper level of presence. It is a silence that does not shout, but also does not disappear. Billy Graham saw this moment as a point of quiet revelation, not in the sense of providing answers, but of showing the cost of living always oriented outward. When silence arrives, it reveals the inner space that was left unattended. There is no need to interpret this emptiness immediately. It does not ask for analysis or correction. It simply exists. And perhaps that is exactly what makes it so uncomfortable, because there is no clear action to take, no specific problem to solve. Functioning on autopilot helps during the day. At night, it demands its price. The mind slows down, but the sensation remains. And it is in this interval that many people realize that, despite everything they have achieved, something inside remains untouched. This silence creates a suspension between what has been done and what is yet to be done, between what one has and what one feels. It is a delicate space where external life no longer fully fills the inner experience. Nothing needs to be concluded here. Silence does not demand closure. It simply reveals what has been ignored. And perhaps the first step is not to fill this emptiness, but to allow it to be noticed without haste. When this inner emptiness remains unrecognized for a long time, it begins to shape the way a person relates to their own life, not in a dramatic way, but subtly. Achievements continue to happen, days remain organized, but a sense of completeness does not settle in. Everything seems correct, yet little feels sufficient. Billy Graham observed that in this state, a person begins to live in search of a fulfillment that never fully arrives. Each new accomplishment brings brief relief, followed by the quiet return of the same sense of lack. Not because the achievement has no value, but because it does not reach the place where the emptiness formed. Over time, this creates a restlessness that is difficult to name. The person begins to wonder why they cannot feel fully satisfied. They question themselves. They try to convince themselves that they should be fine. And this constant effort to adjust to what one should feel deepens the inner disconnection even further. This emptiness also affects how time is experienced. The past is remembered with a sense that something was not fully lived. The present is crossed with efficiency, but without depth. The future becomes a constant promise that perhaps something will finally make sense, and so life is continually postponed. Billy Graham saw that this process creates a quiet weariness. The person is not unhappy in the classic sense, but neither do they feel truly whole. They live in an in-between state, where nothing feels wrong enough to change everything, yet nothing feels complete enough to rest. This prolonged emptiness can lead to a gradual loss of inner sensitivity. Emotions become shallower, surprise fades, wonder becomes rare. Not because life has lost its value, but because the person can no longer connect deeply with what they are living. Ignoring this emptiness does not eliminate it, it only adapts. It may appear as constant fatigue, as subtle discouragement, as a sense that life is always too busy to be truly felt. And little by little, this becomes normalized. Billy Graham understood this as one of the risks of a life built solely on external structures. When everything rests on what one does, what one has, and what one achieves, the inner space becomes vulnerable. And when that space is not cared for, a sense of lack settles in even amid abundance. None of this happens overnight. It is a slow, almost invisible process, and precisely because of that, so common. Many people live this way for years, believing that emptiness is simply part of adult life, responsibility, or success. This deepening offers no answers. It only reveals the inner cost of living without listening to that inner space. A cost that does not show up in results, but that weighs silently on the experience of being alive. Perhaps the emptiness that appears even when everything is in place is not a mistake, nor a sign of failure. It does not arise to invalidate what has been built, but to reveal that there is an inner space that cannot be reached by achievements alone. Recognizing this does not resolve the issue, it only makes it visible. Billy Graham never treated this kind of feeling as something to be quickly corrected. For him, this emptiness was a sign that inner life had been left in silence for too long, not as an accusation, but as an invitation to awareness. It is possible that this video did not offer clear answers, and that is intentional, because the sense of lack that arises even in full lives rarely dissolves through quick explanations. It asks for time, presence, and space to be noticed without haste. I suggest that you subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you continue to follow reflections that move at this same pace. Human themes, observed with depth through the ideas of Billy Graham, without ready-made formulas and without quick promises. If you wish, leave a comment. It can be something simple, a short sentence about when you first noticed this feeling of lack, or just one word that represents how this theme touched you. Perhaps the most important thing is not to fill this emptiness now, but to allow it to be recognized. Some questions do not ask for immediate answers. They simply ask for space to continue existing. And perhaps that is exactly what this reflection proposes, not to resolve everything, but to remain attentive to what is happening inside, even when, on the outside, nothing seems to be missing.